greatly jeopardized their opportunity to earn their way into the college football playoff by beating Alabama in the SEC championship game. Glad to have you with us. College football playoff top 25. These are the last rankings before the ones come out on Sunday. Exclusively noon Eastern time here on ESPN. You'll see them as soon as we do. Then we'll know who's going to be in the college football playoff. Joined, as always, by my partners, Kirk Herbstreit, David Pollack, Jesse Palmer, and Joey Galloway. So as we get started, let's look at the storylines going in to these penultimate rankings, ones right before the final ones. In the SEC, it'll be Alabama and Florida again. Crimson Tide took care of business. The Gators did not. You've seen the shoe throw. Game was lost well before the shoe throw, probably in practice during the week. The Gators put themselves in jeopardy. Rematch in the ACC. We're going to tell you how rare it is for a team to sweep and how rare it is for the second rematch of top 5 teams to be even close. Clemson and Notre Dame for the ACC championship. And in the Big Ten, Ohio State is in, only had to play 5 games to get there. Northwestern is probably kicking itself. Had they not stumbled against Michigan State, they probably would have been in a position to earn their way in to the college football playoff field. So, Kirk, what are you looking forward to seeing in these rankings where we expect the top 5 will be the same?
Yeah, I think we all agreed, obviously, the top 5 is going to be the same without any big shakeups from last weekend. I think it's a little bit further down. You know, it's storylines like Coastal Carolina trying to narrow the gap on Cincinnati. It's where's Iowa State? You know, they made a big jump last week. What happens to Iowa State this week if there's chaos ahead of them this weekend? And I think even USC, the Pac-12, you know, we talked about that a little bit on game day last week. Just the fact that it's not pretty, but they continue to find ways to win games. I'm anxious to see what the committee thinks of Clay Helton's bunch after last weekend.
Now, we're going to talk about that a little bit later on after the rankings are revealed. Obviously, we haven't seen them, but now we can. College football playoff top 25 brought to you by AT&T 5G. And look at San Jose State. The Spartans of Brent Brennan, who is a hot coaching commodity there in the Mountain West Championship game against Boise and ranked for the first time. Tulsa's in the American Championship game. They are at number 23, and Colorado hangs on after losing for the first time this season, falling at the hands of Utah. Let's look at 20 through 16 now. And Iowa has wrapped up the schedule at 6-2, not going to be able to play Michigan this week. Miami falls 8 spots. What do you think, Joey, as you look at Louisiana? Louisiana's only losses to Coastal Carolina. They've beaten Iowa State. Iowa State might be up at 6 this week. What do you think about where the Raging Cajuns are ranked?
I think they have a chance of being higher, but quite honestly, I think we've almost forgotten about that win against Iowa State to open up the season. I think in that first week, so much talk, but Iowa State has had so much success. Now getting into that top 10, we've sort of forgotten what Louisiana has done. They're sitting at 9-1, having a terrific season, and could be one of those teams that's screaming, we deserve more respect.
If there was a lower spot to drop Miami to after that poor performance against North Carolina Saturday, the Hurricanes might have plummeted even more. Let's continue up the rankings and look at 11 through 15. North Carolina jumps up a couple of spots. Northwestern, who will play for the Big Ten championship against Ohio State, only lost a bad one against a poor Michigan State team. And SC's only up a couple of spots, Jesse. What do you make of that?
Yeah, there's SC, and when the first rankings came out, they were number 18, and guys, we know it's just really hard to climb the rankings when you don't play and beat ranked teams. The Trojans have gotten no help from their counterparts inside the Pac-12. Everybody's losing, and as a result, it's just really hard to envision beating a 3-2 Oregon team that didn't even win the Pac-12 North. Hard to envision the Trojans cracking the top 4 for the playoff. The Pac-12's playoff hopes are done.
Even with Colorado's loss, and in the year in which you're changing the rules, they should just let USC and Colorado play for the Pac-12 championship. They're the ones with the best records that are able to play, with Washington being unable to go. It'll be USC against Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. Or Indiana, I should say, is at number 11, still a quality win for Ohio State. The Buckeyes have a chance to get another one against Northwestern in the Big Ten championship game. Okay, let's look at the top 10 now. And sitting at number 10 is Oklahoma. David, is there a shot for the Sooners if they beat Iowa State and maybe get a little help with some upsets to somehow sneak back into the field again?
So you're saying there's a chance? Maybe? Mary Swanson's? I mean, long shot, but if you're watching Oklahoma, you should like what you're seeing. Definitely on the defensive side of the football, better than they've been in years past.
one spot ahead of the Sooners, who now moved up one spot. Cincinnati, I tell you what, Cincinnati needs to get back on the field. They've dropped a couple of spots the last couple of weeks. I'm not really sure that I love this right now, Kirk. What do you think?
Well, you're right. They're a brand that's a bit forgotten. They haven't had a chance to play, and it's affected them as far as the momentum. They had some great momentum going about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and it's a little bit out of sight, out of mind. Hopefully they'll get a chance to play this weekend and make a statement.
You guys know me. I'm not one to jump on the committee. I know that different people, different years, you talk about consistency, and when you have that many people, you're going to find some discrepancies. Cincinnati keeps dropping when they don't play. Other teams don't. Let's see who's at number 8. Cincinnati will have a chance in the American Championship game. And Georgia, despite losing its 2 most important games this year, committee loves the Bulldogs. I mean, that's certainly in Alabama's favor. It might give Alabama some leeway in the SEC Championship game since the Crimson Tide handled the Bulldogs with ease in the regular season. And Florida also beat Georgia. Let's look at number 7 just ahead of Georgia. At 7 is Florida. Now, that was a terrible loss against LSU. Did you think the Gators would fall farther, Joey?
I absolutely did. And Reese, this entire time once we got into that top 10, I kept thinking, where the heck is Florida? Florida's sitting at number 7. They still got a shot at this thing. I assumed with losing to a 3-5 LSU team that had looked terrible, lost by 1,000,000 points to Alabama, beating Florida. I thought Florida would be much lower than this, but sitting at 7, they knock off Alabama. We got a discussion on Sunday.
All right, so we have Florida at number 7. Kirk, I thought they would fall a little bit farther too. I did think that the floor for them had to be one spot above Georgia, which is where they are right now. I've said about Ohio State leading up to this that you can't give them everything. Same holds true for Florida. Just because they played more games, you can't lose a game like that and still be in contention for the playoff spot, even if you win the SEC, can you?
Well, I think it's how they lost that game, right? I think it was a home game and a game. It's college football. It's emotions. They looked at the film. They thought LSU would just walk in there. LSU had opt-outs. They had everything going against them. And to be candid, I think Florida just kind of, I don't want to say they just showed up, but the way the game went and the way they have looked in recent weeks, that was not the Florida team we've seen. They must be peeking ahead to Atlanta and start thinking about getting ready for Alabama. They'll be a very different team Saturday, obviously, when they play Bama, but there should be a penalty to me. I'm surprised that they only dropped one spot to number 7. And as Joey said, they're still, if there's if they win and, I don't know if winning is enough. That would be a great discussion tonight. Is winning enough now that we know they're at 7? Would that be enough? If they would have beaten LSU, Jesse, it would be a given. Now, I don't know, but dropping one spot, I think a lot of people are scratching their heads.
Well, if they beat number 1 Alabama in the SEC title game, it becomes an interesting discussion simply because an SEC champion has never been left out of the college football playoff in 6 years. Of course, a 2-loss team has never been let in. So really interesting. If they could, the way the Gators defense is played, it doesn't look like they're capable of beating Bama. They'll certainly have to show up and be ready to go much more than they were this past weekend, that's for sure.
I don't think a 2-loss team should be disqualified simply because of the number of losses. But if it comes against a team that has played the way LSU has, that's a bad loss. You have to be penalized for it. And up to this point, I'm not sure that look, final rankings, maybe they can't jump the divide and make it into the playoff. But that's a tough one to swallow. I think if they beat Alabama, the best case scenario for them is like Penn State a few years ago. They had the win over Ohio State. Ohio State still ended up going to the playoff. All right, let's look at the top of the latest college football playoff rankings. My producer, Calfman, says the most dramatic way to do this is to start at the top, and then we'll show you where we change. At number 1, we anticipate that Alabama will remain there, and the Crimson Tide ran the table in the regular season in the SEC. They are 10-0. At number 2, has to be Notre Dame, right? Fighting Irish, also 10-0, off last week as they prepare for the rematch in the ACC title game that Kirk and Chris Fowler will call on Saturday afternoon from Charlotte. College Game Day will be there against Clemson, who I assume is going to be number 3. Is that correct? It is. Dabo Swinney's Tigers holding firm at number 3. So now we've got 1, 2, 3. You've got an Ohio State team that's only played 5 games. You got Iowa State that we haven't seen, and you got Texas A&M, who's also had a little bit of time off due to the coronavirus. So let's look at number 6. Iowa State, despite the loss to Louisiana, who has a better record. The Raging Cajuns with a 17-point victory over Iowa State in the opener. We like to say every game counts. Apparently that one has been mitigated. At number 5, one spot ahead of Iowa State, is Texas A&M. The Aggies also have only played 8 games. They play Tennessee this weekend. There'll be one game on their schedule that they were unable to make up. So hanging in at number 4 is Ohio State, with half the number of games of the 3 teams ranked in front of them and fewer games than the 2 teams directly behind them, but an opportunity to win the Big Ten championship. They have a couple of quality wins among their 6 if they're able to beat Northwestern by beating Indiana and the Wildcats, and seemingly only a win away from making it into the college football playoff. So what's your reaction to what you see, Kirk?
I think what you just said, if Ohio State was going to drop down because of number of games, it would have been last week or this week. The reality is what it is with Ohio State, with everything that's gone on. The fact that they are sitting there at 5-0, they're able to play this weekend in Indianapolis against Pat Fitzgerald and Northwestern. If they were to win that game and be crowned a Big Ten champion, they're playing. They're 60 minutes away, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. They're 60 minutes away from making it into the playoff. The question to me, David, is the other games. The game in Charlotte, what will be the results of Notre Dame and Clemson and what that potentially could do, if at all. I mean, I've heard Dabo Swinney say if Clemson loses, they're still good, that they should be in, even with 2 losses. I think we all agree that if Notre Dame were to lose, that both of those teams would probably be in. So I think I know you love chaos. You like Armageddon. What do you think of what we have, and what's your favorite Armageddon situation coming up next weekend?
I do love some chaos. I think if you have Notre Dame beat Clemson, let's let the fun begin. I mean, I think it would be outstanding just to see what happens next, because 4 out of the last 6 years, number 5 has made it into the college football playoff. It's not a horrible spot to be in if you're Texas A&M. So, listen, I think that Notre Dame, how they lose will be interesting to see how they judge if they lost, but Clemson losing throws in a scenario where it would just be fun. There'd be a lot of discussion, and it's going to be a lot of ifs, ands, or buts, and what you like best, Joey.
It gets interesting to me, Kirk. And you mentioned that Dabo said, thinks that they should be in even if they lose. Well, if you look at Florida's situation, and Florida just fell 1 spot and losing to a 3-win LSU team, if Clemson goes on and loses to Notre Dame, which is number 2 in the country for a second time, gives them 2 losses, why would they assume that they're going to fall more than 1 spot, which is exactly what Florida did? On the other side of it, if I'm Cincinnati, I'm really upset right now. I'm really not happy about the fact that we've fallen a spot each week after not playing, and it's not their fault. And so as we have all these discussions about teams not playing versus teams playing 5 games, how many games you get in, it seems as if some teams are being punished for not playing football games and some teams are not. And so if I'm one of the little guys, if I'm Cincinnati and I'm always scratching and clawing to be considered one of the big boys, I look at this and what's going on and say, look, this is not fair. We're being punished for not playing, and it's not our fault.
Joey, I think my biggest takeaway from this past weekend was that 2 spots are now taken. Bama's been number 1, every ranking coming out. After beating Arkansas, they're going to get in no matter what, even if they lose to Florida. They're not going to move them off the number 1 spot outside the top 4, even with a loss against the Gators. And I think with the Gators losing to LSU, that really helped out Notre Dame. Last week, I thought that if a situation came up where a 1-loss Florida would have beaten Alabama and Ohio State looked really good in their Big Ten title game against Northwestern. If Clemson blew Notre Dame out, there was a chance maybe the Irish would drop out of the top 4. But after UNC pummeled then number 10 Miami this past weekend, and the Gators lost against LSU. You take a look, Kirk, at Notre Dame's resume right now. Those wins against Clemson and against UNC, that's really impressive in the committee's eyes. And even if they were to lose, and maybe even lose by 20-plus points against Clemson this upcoming weekend, I still think, Kirk, their resume stacks up well against what could be a 6-0 Big Ten champion Ohio State or even an 8-1 Texas A&M.
You know, one thing I just wanted to add real quick before Reese hops back in, I just wanted to say that if whether it's right or wrong, there's a perception with Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State that they are the better teams and better programs in college football. And if the shoe were on the other foot, and Alabama, let's say, played 5 games, or Clemson played 5 games, and the 5 games that they played, they looked dominant. And then they were going to go off into their conference championship and go have a chance to win their conference and play 6 games. I would guarantee you that they would be facing the same situation that Ohio State is facing. So you can say that's unfair. The committee's trying to put the best 4 teams in the playoff. And that's where this subjective analysis, I think, is very frustrating for a lot of people. I don't want to say it's a different set of rules, but it's a different perception based on the equity that Alabama, Nick Saban, what Urban Meyer and now Ryan Day's done at Ohio State, and what Dabo Swinney has created at Clemson, because Ohio State was 1-0, Reese, and the AP had them at number 3 in the country. So there's a consensus that they're an elite team. It just comes down to the amount of games. But if Clemson and Alabama had that same scenario, they would also be getting that benefit.
Yes. That's true, but those aren't mutually exclusive. There's no false dilemma there. They would be getting that benefit, but it would also be fair to question them. And I'll go ahead and say it, there is a different set of rules. Now, maybe because those teams are so good and pass the test, the eye test or the football judgment test or whatever you want to call it, maybe that's as it should be. But I think the thing beyond Ohio State, who I've had ranked number 3 in the AP poll and still do, and I think they can win the national championship. I think the thing below it is what Joey's talking about. I think the frustrating thing is Cincinnati is slipping, and in fact, State has moved into number 6. Cyclones playing for the Big 12 championship, and maybe with a puncher's chance to sneak in. Florida just behind at number 7, as we are joined by the chairman of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, Gary Barta, also the athletic director at Iowa. Gary, let's start where a lot of the discussion is centered the last couple of weeks with Ohio State. In the committee's judgment, why has Ohio State, and really even Texas A&M, though they haven't missed as many games as Ohio State, why have those two been able to hold their positions and teams like Cincinnati have slipped in the standings?
This week is certainly unique, Reese, in that 12 of the 25 teams ranked did not play, and in the top 6, 5 of those teams didn't play. So when it comes to Ohio State and Texas A&M, there was some discussion in that 1 through 5, but really not a lot of discussion of moving anybody. When it comes to Cincinnati, you know, the committee has shown appreciation for Cincinnati from the beginning. We haven't had a chance to watch them play since November 21st, and the teams around them, the teams ahead of them, have played 2 or 3 games that we've been able to evaluate. And one of the things that holds Cincinnati back, again, a great team, they don't have a win against a top 25. So the teams, Iowa State was idle, Cincinnati was idle, a lot of teams in that top 10 that didn't play this week, which created some challenges in evaluation, but not a lot of movement.
Understanding, and I agree with, a head-to-head result, particularly early in the season, can't be the be-all, end-all. But there's a pretty wide gap between how the committee is ranking Iowa State and the team that they lost to, Louisiana. How would you describe the reasons for that? Why is there such a gap between those two when Louisiana, granted from a smaller conference, probably not the same overall schedule, but they beat them decisively and they have a better record?
Yeah, when you look at Iowa State, one of the things that happened along the way, they beat a highly ranked Oklahoma team. They also beat 20th ranked Texas. They're leading the Big 12. The committee kept watching that defense and that offense improve. They have the leading rusher in the country. And so the appreciation for Iowa State is related to that. As it relates to Louisiana, a terrific team, they did beat Iowa State. And the committee certainly gives them credit for that. Their loss was to Coastal Carolina. They'll have an opportunity to play Coastal again in the Sun Belt, two really good Sun Belt teams. But what Iowa State has done since that loss, it's more to say. It says more about that than it does about Louisiana's play.
I think that most everyone that looks at this objectively would say the top 4 teams that you have are the 4 best teams. They are the 4 most powerful teams, and while Ohio State hasn't had as many opportunities, they've looked terrific when they've played. But if there are upsets this weekend, how would you describe the opportunity for an undefeated Cincinnati or an undefeated Coastal Carolina with couple solid wins on the resume? And Cincinnati would get a victory over a team that's currently ranked if they beat Tulsa. How would you describe the gap that they would have to cover to be able to make it into the playoff as opposed to just a New Year's Six game?
Well, we have 10 championships coming up. I hope we get an opportunity to play all of them because, is always the case, it's ranked teams against ranked teams. And so we're going to have 10 new games to put into the mix and to evaluate. I'm not going to speculate on how it all might come out. But this is a weekend. One of the reasons that it's so exciting is we get to see 10 matchups against teams, all of whom are ranked. I think all of them are ranked, and it should be an exciting weekend.
Based on the discussion in the committee room, Gary, the two teams at the top, Alabama and Notre Dame, are they viewed as being, maybe along with Clemson, are those teams viewed as being significantly ahead, both in accomplishment and in football judgment, where they might have some leeway this weekend?
Alabama is undefeated. I mentioned earlier in the top 6 there was only one team that played this week. They beat Arkansas 52-3. Offense, defense, special teams. They're just from top to bottom. They're a fantastic team. Notre Dame also undefeated, and their defense has really impressed the committee. Ian Book got better and better as the year went along, and so watching the ACC championship, watching that game between Notre Dame and Clemson, I know I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure the committee is as well.
And we're certainly looking forward to it as well, Gary. I'm also looking forward to chatting with you on Sunday when the final College Football Playoff Selection Committee rankings come out. We find out which 4 teams make it into the College Football Playoff. Always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, there is Gary Barta, who is put in the difficult situation to answer those questions for the 13 committee members who get together and come up with these rankings. And it's not done in a traditional form where you just list 1 through 25. They vote for them in groups, and sometimes that creates a little bit of movement. Probably have seen a result of that with Cincinnati's slip the last couple of weeks. Now, as you know, the college football playoff semifinals are scheduled to be played on New Year's Day in the Rose Bowls and the Sugar Bowls. Now, in the Sugar Bowl, you'll be able to have fans. That is not the case right now in the Rose Bowl. And just a little while ago, the executive director of the college football playoff, Mr. Bill Hancock, issued this statement. He says, at this moment, College Football Playoff looks forward to playing one of the 2 semifinal playoff games at the Rose Bowl as scheduled. As we move forward with our planning, we continue to hope that the Rose Bowl's appeal to government officials to allow the families of student athletes to attend will be permitted. Just as student athlete families will be welcomed at the Sugar Bowl, the other New Year's Six games, and the championship game in Miami. Statement goes on to read this way. Given the vast space inside the Rose Bowl Stadium, we are confident that if families were able to attend, they could do so in a safe and socially distant manner. For many families, this will be the last chance they have to see their sons play college football. We understand that under California's COVID-19 protocols, fans in general will not be able to attend. We hope the small number of families who want to attend.
Keyshawn, J. Will, and Zubin presented here by Progressive Insurance. All of our guests, including A.J. Hawk, who has quite an interest in a couple of his old teams, the Packers and the Ohio State Buckeyes, coming up here in just 30 seconds. The changing of the guard, you woke up Monday and Kansas City and not Pittsburgh was in first place in the AFC. And you woke up on Monday and it was the Green Bay Packers and not the New Orleans Saints that are in first place in the NFC. So you got Kansas City and Green Bay. Many think they're on a collision course for Super Bowl 55. The future of the league, the present of the league, and Patrick Mahomes versus a guy that's going to leave an incredible legacy in Aaron Rodgers. Both guys looking for Super Bowl championship number 2, and both in some way, whatever order you want, going 1-2 in the MVP race. And for more on that, let's bring in A.J. Hawk. He's a BCS national champion, a Super Bowl champion, a 2-time All-American at Ohio State. Is that all he did? His player resume brought to you by Indeed. Hiring you need Indeed. Learn more at Indeed.com/credit. AJ, that's Jay Will giving you a shout out. Let's start here. Let's start with the NFL. We'll get to Ohio State in a moment because I know Jay Will is rare to talk about his Buckeyes with you. But first things first, you've watched Aaron Rodgers' entire career. Is the way he's playing right now, is this the best football we have seen from Aaron Rodgers?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, we've seen him do so many special things over the years, and I got to see it firsthand for so long. But yeah, I mean, I'd be hard pressed to point to a time in his career where I could say, oh yeah, he was far and away playing better then than he is right now. Like, I feel like this year he's found a way to kind of put it all together, like physically, mentally. Like you watch him play, he just looks like he's having so much fun. It looks like it's easy for him, which is something that he's been able to do his whole career. And you mentioned he and Patrick Mahomes, standing up top, fighting for that MVP race. I tell you what, it just got me thinking. Like, State Farm is not too upset. State Farm has both them and their campaigns running commercial all over the place. Like, those guys, that was money well spent to get those two guys.
How confident are you that the Packers can make a serious, and I mean serious, Super Bowl run?
I'm very, very confident in what their offense is able to do, and mainly because of what Aaron can do. And Devontae Adams is one of the most, for some reason, like under the radar, unbelievable superstars out there in the league. I think he's finally starting to get a little pub of what he deserves, but he is so good, and he's so good for the team and such a good leader. But I'm super confident in their offense. Their defense, most of the times I'm very confident, but what worries me is what happened last year in the NFC Championship game when the Niners were able to kind of run all over them. I just hope something like that doesn't happen again, to where their defense can kind of get exposed when it really matters.
Will it take for them to have the number 1 seed to get one of these Tampa Bays, one of these New Orleans, the Rams, Seattle, to that minus degree temperature in Lambeau for them to advance to Tampa Bay for the Super Bowl?
I mean, it definitely can't hurt. I think we know that they can play well in cold weather, and some teams handle it better than others, depending on who comes in. I mean, there's so much just up in the air. I feel like in the AFC and NFC this year, what are the Saints going to be? When does Drew Brees come back? Are the Rams all right? Are they legit? Like, they're up and down, their consistency, but they look pretty good right now. And Tampa Bay with Tom Brady, I don't know exactly who they are. I know they got a win last week, but it's just it's such a unique year. I have a hard time predicting anything when I'm trying to pick, like, who may win this game? I don't know. Like, you never know what's going to happen. Patriots go out and win, 45-0 a couple weeks ago? Like, I could have never guessed that.
AJ, what's the one thing that could derail the Packers' chance to win the Super Bowl?
Well, first off, you got to make sure you find a way to keep Aaron upright and keep him healthy. That's the biggest thing. I think you need him in the lineup, and guys like Devontae and the running backs, and their offensive line's done a good job too. But I think a team that could come in and be fairly balanced and have success